This presentation of In Their Own Words is dedicated to the brave men and women of the United States Armed Forces. The invasion of Europe was the largest challenge facing the United States in World War II. But before the invasion fleet headed towards the beaches, hundreds of troops were transported behind enemy lines. As it had been in the invasions of Italy and North Africa before, the gliders, developed by the Allies, would transport most of the troops destined to lead the fight into harm's way. While they might be preferable to a parachute jump, gliders were fraught with their own set of risks. Flimsily constructed of wood and canvas, these unpowered and unarmed planes fell like a stone and had the flight characteristics of an airborne freighter. Many of them would meet their demise at the hands of German anti-aircraft gunners, or piled up against a hedgerow or glider trap as they slid to a deadly stop in the fields of Normandy. But some got through, and the brave men who flew them made all the difference on D-Day. William Horn was comfortably ensconced in his job at Shell Oil when his nation called for him. He was draft exempt, but like so many men of his generation, he heeded that call by joining the Army as a glider pilot at the age of 31.
I had no idea about any of it. And I didn't learn about it until I got in and got involved, and it was too late. But a curious thing happened on the way to the forum. They did a tremendous selling job through the Army to get guys to volunteer for glider pilot training. They could find very few people with any glider experience when they started the program. So consequently, they signed up about 30,000 trainees. They didn't have any gliders for them to fly, and they put them in pools to go through basic training, countless hours of looking at instructional movies and things of this sort, and it got to be a morale problem. And then all of a sudden they got the CG-4A in production, and they got the school set up, and they got a flow started. They would graduate in the early schools at Victorville, Stuttgart, Arkansas, and Dalhart, Texas, classes of 100 or 200 about every 2 weeks. So they said, well, we're never going to get all these guys trained. So in the early spring of 1943, the Army did, the Air Force, when I say Air Force, we're talking about the Air Corps, but it was really the Air Force at that time because this designation was changed in 1941. But they suddenly realized, what are we going to do with all these guys? They're sitting around at all these bases and all of them screaming, and it's a morale problem. So they put on a big screening job with all the places where they had glider pilot trainees waiting, and they gave them an opportunity to transfer back to their original branch of service if they wanted to, or if they wanted to transfer to cadet training and were qualified physically, or navigation, bombardier, they could do that. Or the other case was you could remain and indicate that you wanted to pursue the glider pilot training program. Well, this is the first time I've ever heard of in warfare where guys were offered a discharge to go home. Because if you had volunteered for the glider pilot program itself, and they admitted they couldn't complete your training, you could take a discharge and go home. Two guys that entered with me in my little flight class of 8, two of them went back to civilian life and were never re-entered the service. That cut the program down considerably, and they were able to get on a trend of a normal graduation rate to take care of the people. We went through what they call dead strict training. We'd fly light planes, we'd cut the motor, stop the prop, do a landing from 5,000 or 6,000 feet, doing certain maneuvers on the way down and land on a spot. And then we went into the little 3-place gliders. Somebody got the bright idea, well, we don't have enough training gliders, we'll make gliders out of light aircraft. So they took the J-3 Cub, the Taylorcraft L2, and the Aeronca, removed the engine, put a third seat in front, and made a 3-place glider out of it. This was very good training for all of us because it gave us our first feel of a tow rope. Handling a tow rope is just like skiing on the water. You have to keep tautness in the rope. If you're starting to get slack, you're getting into trouble. So you maneuver where you can to keep that certain tautness in the rope and keep it in a certain position. So this was valuable training, but these later guys that came through never did get advantage of this. That continued on through about the early fall of 1944. This is shortly after the Holland mission. We put 1,899 CG-4A gliders into Holland over about a 5-day period. None of them had co-pilots. They had one pilot. And the airborne didn't like this at all because they were completely at the mercy of that one pilot. And so the Air Force said, we've made a mistake, we're going to have more trainees. So what they did, they created another morale problem. They went to the cadet program, and the newly graduated cadets that graduated from twin engine school and those that graduated from single engine school looking forward to being a P-47 or a P-51 pilot next week, they sent them all to glider school. And they all had to go through and be qualified as a glider pilot. And this gave us the tremendous backlog of people. They were excellent flyers, but they were poorly trained in ground combat. So that's kind of the way the program went. It was, we always said it's a new day every Monday. They came out with a new program every Monday. But it was a very successful program, and it was a tough job. It wasn't any tougher than a lot of other jobs in World War II, but it happened to be our job, and for my part, I think we did well at it.
But flying the gliders was only half the mission. The tactics for their use had evolved very slowly and were only beginning to take shape.
The airborne had no conception of what they wanted. Hap Arnold, the Air Force general of the air, it was really the father of this CG-4A, not the airborne. Arnold said, give me a ship that will carry a Jeep, or give me a Jeep with wings, is the way he first put it. And this is what evolved down, the CG-4A. We had what we call a CG-3. The A means the first model for production. We had a CG-3, a prototype that was a 8 or 9 passenger, everybody sitting on a bench in the middle in tandem, but it had no cargo carrying capacity. It could carry troops, and that was it. And this was mainly an afterthought of the German DFS 230 that captured that fort in Belgium and kind of opened up the knowledge of what airborne operations could be. That big ship right there, since we didn't have helicopters in World War II, was the answer to the airborne, because it's like I explained to a lot of people, that 75 millimeter howitzer sitting over there, it has to be packed into 5 separate cartons, packs, to be dropped from a C-47 at whatever altitude, either with parachute or just drop it. And they would usually drop from 700 feet or 800 feet in that area, and you drop that at 120 or 130 miles an hour. When it hits the ground, they're going to be scattered out for a mile. And the airborne, you remember, the only thing that they've got to protect themselves with is what they can carry on their backs, small arms. They going into a heavily infested area with enemy area with tanks, heavy artillery, all kinds of mobile equipment, and they've got to take this area with rifles and carbines and pistols. Their initial life was probably about 4 hours, and that was not enough, because their survival depended on an immediate a link up being made with the supply source. So this bird gave them the capabilities of carrying that. We could carry that 75 millimeter in, not in the packs, but fully assembled. And if required, that gun could be rolled out in action in 2 or 3 minutes, because you would carry a startup crew, you'd carry start up ammunition, and when it hit the ground, it was ready to fire if it needed. And of course, we carried the 105 millimeter, and we carried the 37 millimeter anti-tank gun. So this gave them probably 8 to 10 more hours of survival time, and was the difference between most all the airborne missions in World War II. I don't know if the airborne would admit to this, but that's the way it was.
The question for men who flew the gliders was how to land with no power and all that heavy equipment.
You got to remember that the aircraft was designed to crash. It's the only aircraft in the history of the Air Force was designed to crash, and it did. We only recovered about 25% of gliders in the ETO, or most of them were committed for combat. Not because of structural failure, but because we had wrecked them when we landed them. You know, if you saw you were going to hit a tree or something, you didn't mind sticking that wing down into the ground and ground looping and tearing up the whole glider or washing out the gear. It didn't matter. They wrote that glider off when you took off, and they also wrote the pilots off. The glider infantry that we carried were the guys that really had the guts, because they went into that glider without any parachutes on, and so did we, because there was no way we were going to jump out of that glider and leave those guys up there, not with them sitting up back there with their Tommy guns aimed at us. So those guys were I think they should have had a G on their wings also, and it proved out in many cases that those guys were the courageous guys. I never knew of a. They've got to go in there and sit down without a parachute, and now they're trained to be airborne. They may not be parachute qualified, but that's their goal, to become parachute qualified. So they're going in there, and they have nothing to save themselves with. The paratrooper getting up in the C-47 or something, he's got a parachute on. He knows if something happens to that ship, if it drops a wing or whatever, he can bail out. He's got a lifeline. These poor guys didn't have a lifeline except for that glider pilot sitting up there in the front of the glider. And most of us took that pretty seriously. We felt responsible for those guys back there. We were going to get them down as safely as we could, unless we couldn't do it. That's what made it so hard in Holland to go in with 14 troopers and one pilot, and you had to try on a flight in of maybe 3 or 4 hours, try to tell this guy sitting next to you how to land that glider if something happened to you, and he'd never been up in an airplane before. So that's the kind of fate they were looking to, and that's why I call them the bravest guys in the sky. I always have had a high respect for them.
Once the training was complete and the mission scheduled, it was time to mount up and take to the skies.
We took off from a base near Paris, France, our particular group, and formed up into echelons of, I think, about 4 planes to the right or left. This was the only mission we ever flew where the C-47s carried two glider, double tow. And we were scheduled to go into what was called a landing zone S, which is about 5 miles beyond the Rhine River. We'd just taken off from our field, which was near the Orly airport in France, and we were assembling, getting together. And there was a glider that was about 5 flights ahead of me that I was watching for some reason. And all of a sudden, I see him he wiggle his wings, and he hit the release and cut off and started a slow dive like this. Well, what had happened, the long tow and the short tow rope had gotten mixed up with his tail surfaces. He lost complete control. We had a 350-foot tow rope on each glider, and then we had on the long tow, we had an additional 75-foot link that put us, so if we got like this, we were theoretically about 25 feet behind the other glider. But when you get the tail surface, this is a tow rope coming back here through those tail surfaces, you can see how fragile it is. Any kind of a force will just tear them up. And this guy went in just like this from about 3,000 feet. And he got down about 500 feet off the ground, and the glider just flipped like that. both wingtips just kind of exploded, and the next instant he hit the ground. He had a load of high explosive ammunition and about 6 troopers in that glider. I talked to some of the medics when I got back to the base, and they said the only thing that they found when they got there, they found one hand from some person back in the back of the glider hanging on to some of the steel tubing, and that was all that was left of the whole crew. That was about 7 or 8 guys gone just like that. We had a train of aircraft once we got en route and joined up with other groups from other sections of France that took about 5.5 hours to pass one point. If you were sitting out there looking up, you'd sit there 5.5 hours and watch that continuous 4-plane element go over one, and just continuously. It's awesome because most people can't visualize that. Even today, I find it strange that we had that much equipment and that much people and that much airplanes to put in the air. Well, we got close. By the way, I had one of those qualified power pilots as a co-pilot with me, and he spelled me off and did a very good job. The only problem is he didn't know from beans about combat. He'd never been trained other than just basic Air Force training. See, we were qualified on every weapon that the airborne had. We were qualified to fire it and operate it, from the artillery down to the pea shooter. So when we got close to the Rhine River, Big S out there by Wessel, and there's fog, smoke, or something down there. We couldn't see the ground. We got across the river, we got to our landing zone. A tow pilot, by navigation, would give us a green light when we were near or at the designated LZ. We had about a minute to cut off. If he gave us a red light, then he had the provision and the permission to cut us off himself. But that never happened because it was a court-martial offense to cut that glider off unless you had a damn good reason for it. So when we got over our LZ into Germany, with the aircraft stacking up, I was better than 2,000 feet altitude, and I should have been at 600 feet. And when I cut off, there was nothing down there but ground, smoke. I couldn't see the ground. And so we just flew a pattern by instinct and estimate about where we should make a turn. We were going to make a 180-degree turn and come into the wind and land in this particular spot. It was probably about 200 or 300 acre area, open, flat fields, plowed fields, and pastures. So it wasn't like the experiences the guys had in Normandy. But I got below 1,200 feet before I could even look at the ground or start picking out a spot. And on double tow, I was on a long tow and my tow partner was on a short tow. He was carrying that gun, or gun like that, and I was carrying the ammo and the gun crew for it. So we had planned to land as closely together as possible so they could unite that load and get it into action. So he started in and I started following him because we wanted to land just right behind the other. All of a sudden, here's a big power transmission line right down the middle of the LZ that nobody had told us anything about, and none of the aerial photographs picked it up and showed it. He had to go under that thing. He had to pop his chute and go under it. And I guess it's like one of our normal transmission towers over here, about probably 60 or 80 feet high, something like that. So he was getting pretty low when he went under that thing. Fortunately, I had not activated my drag chute. It gets your attention in a hurry, especially if there's any trees around that you're trying to dodge. But the landing itself in this aircraft, doing the slow approaches that Mike Murphy put into effect, was fairly simple and easy. And it's the reason that a lot of these gliders got down with safe loads. I had enough altitude and speed that I got over it. But we still landed just like this. And that picture right back there is the picture of the two gliders that landed. We were within about 50 yards of each other when we stopped. Neither of us had any damage. I had a few bullet holes in the tail of mine that I heard, but I had no structural damage.
With the busy fall season just around the corner, you might be looking for wholesome, convenient meals for jam-packed days. Factor, America's #1 ready-to-eat meal kit, can help you fuel up fast with chef-prepared, dietitian-approved, ready-to-eat meals delivered straight to your door. You'll save time, eat well, and stay on track with your healthy lifestyle. Too busy with your end-of-summer goals to cook but want to make sure you're eating well? With Factor, skip the extra trip to the grocery store and the chopping, prepping, and cleaning up too, while still getting the flavor and nutritional quality you need. Factor's fresh, never-frozen meals are ready in just 2 minutes, so all you have to do is heat and enjoy, then get back to crushing your goals. Level up with Gourmet Plus options prepared to perfection by chefs and ready to eat in record time. Treat yourself to upscale meals with premium ingredients like broccolini, leeks, truffle butter, and asparagus. With Factor, you can rest assured you're making a sustainable choice. We offset 100% of our delivery emissions, source 100% renewable electricity for our production sites and offices, and feature sustainably sourced seafood in our meals. This August, get Factor and enjoy eating well without the hassle. Simply choose your meals and enjoy fresh, flavor-packed meals delivered to your door, ready in just 2 minutes, no prep, no mess. Head to factormeals.com/warriors50 and use code warriors50 to get 50% off. That's code warriors50 at factormeals.com/warriors50 to get 50% off.
So when we went into Wessel and landed successfully, we got together at our assembly point, and we were given instructions to go to this particular crossroads and hold it until relieved. It was on the perimeter between the Rhine River and the town of Wessel, and we were to the north and northwest. So we formed up into our little infantry company and went down there, 288 strong, less, of course, a few that didn't get down safely. And we dug in. And about, you understand, as soon as we got behind the German lines, their tendency was to retreat back into Germany, and they had to retreat through our positions, which was the weakest positions because we didn't have any heavy equipment. So that night, a company of, they said, in the first place, they said, "Oh, you guys take this crossroads. There's nothing going to happen up there. This is where they're going to come through if they come through, and we're putting our special 75mm cannon down here to stop them. You guys don't worry." So where do they come through? They come through our position, exactly. About 12 o'clock at night, we hear this clanking and screaming and hollering and all that, and they come up to this crossroads where we're dug in. They have a 2 or 3 advanced scouts that go down this road where we are. My co-pilot was across the road from me, and he could see them. I was behind a hedge with another guy, and he shot and killed this guy coming down. I'll show you his body right over there. I happened to bring back his burp gun and his helmet as a souvenir. But that was the advanced group of the whole company, and they had 3 tanks and 2 ACAC guns that they were pulling. They were mobile guns. And they attacked us in force. We had probably, with the 4 squadrons, we probably had a force of about 250 men left at that time. And about a fourth of them were right on the crossroads. Well, I was dug in by a little 2-story house. They fired a shell through it and set it on fire. There was a German family in there, an older man and wife, his daughter who was pregnant, and a child. This house started burning from the top down. During all this action, we had to get them out of that house and move them down to another German quarters down the road for safety purposes. That went on, and all the lead going around there, you were afraid to stick your head up out of a foxhole. These glider pilots are trigger happy, one thing. We had a lot of ammunition, and we didn't want to have to carry it back to France. So we stopped those guys cold. We didn't have, we had one of our glider pilots who had a bazooka. He knocked out disabled one of the tanks, and they decided to pull back and retreat, which they did. And the next morning, I don't know how many casualties were there. We didn't have a single casualty in our outfit because we were dug in that well, and it was a miracle that it happened that way. But they lost about, I don't know, that Stars and Stripes article I gave you might give you the casualties, I'm not sure. But I'm sure they lost close to 50 or 60 people out of there. There was supposed to be a company of equal strength with us, close to 200 or better. So that was what happened. We did our job for the airborne, and 50 years, our commanding officer got the Silver Star for that. 50 years later, 3 or 4 years ago, in Albuquerque, New Mexico, a grateful Air Force awarded us all the Bronze Star, and 3 of our other members with Silver Stars for the action at Burp Gun Corner. And the unique thing about it is this is an Air Force group. They're not supposed to be a combat ground unit. This is an Air Force group. The only time in Air Force history that such a group has been formed, all officers engaged in actual combat with an enemy and survive as well as we did. The next day we helped the Germans dig trenches to bury their dead out there. And I later learned from a friendship I've developed with a resident of that area that they disinterred those guys and buried them in a national cemetery in Germany.
One of the lesser-known contributions of the heroic glider pilots were the flights behind enemy lines during the Battle of the Bulge.
Well, one reason it was very important was because of supplies, gasoline, and medical personnel. The MASH hospital unit that was taking care of the airborne was captured about the 18th or 19th of December of 1944 in Bastogne. The Germans captured it and moved them off. So they had nothing other than just medics, enlisted medics, who were technicians, to treat the wounded. And they had a heck of a lot of wounded, so they called on a troop carrier to send a glider in with a volunteer medical team. This was done on December the 26th. One of our members, Corky Corwin, and another fellow volunteered for the mission. This first mission was flown on December the 26th because the weather had been horrible, but they were desperate for medical attention. So they flew this crew in. The day prior to that, on December the 25th, one doctor had been flown in with an L-5, a light aircraft. That was the only doctor they had on the premise until this team came in by glider. Now, later that same day, we flew in 10 gliders with ammo and gasoline because the tanks were out of gas and they were getting low on ammunition. So those guys went in and they had a pretty good. Most of them survived. They didn't get shot down. It was a surprise to the Germans that they'd come in that late. This was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and it was starting to get dark. The next day they had a 50 glider mission committed to go in on December the 27th, and this was flown by the 439th and 440th Troop Carrier groups. I know the commander of the 439th very well, and he was in charge of this mission. The 50 gliders that were set up to go in with one pilot, no co-pilot. So I asked him why he made this decision. He said, well, these gliders had no personnel. They were all loaded with high explosive ammunition or gasoline. He said, I knew if they got one hit, the glider was gone. He said, I was not going to risk 2 glider pilots when one could get the job done. So that was the reason, and there was no other personnel in the glider other than the 2 pilots. So they flew the stuff in that enabled the 101st to survive, and Patton was, I think, arrived that same day in late afternoon. But they brought in the ammunition and gasoline that was needed. Now there was about 10 or 15 of those gliders on the end of the train were held up from taking off from the base in France because they found that the loads were not properly tied down. So this large group is ahead of them, and here they are taking off trying to catch up. Well, the first group, the Germans pretty well zeroed in on them, and most of them went through okay. But they were sitting there waiting for this second group, and they just slaughtered that. The 440th Troop Carrier Group lost more planes and pilots in that one mission than they did in all other missions in World War II in Europe. That's how serious it was. Most of the planes never made it back. They crashed where they were, or they crashed en route back to their base.
With losses of this magnitude, it took a special man to be a glider pilot.
We had a bunch of guys, if you asked for a volunteer, they'd volunteer before they knew what it was. They were that kind of people. It was the most unique group of people I was ever associated with, and I coached and taught school before I went to work with Shell Oil Company, and I was utterly amazed at some of the characters I ran across when I got into the glider program. You talk about individuals and individualism, they were the up. Well, our motto, our guardian angel was Bugs Bunny. They were sassy. I don't know how many times they got chewed out for not saluting a superior officer. We didn't believe in saluting. And I don't know, it was really something to be around these guys. But they never backed off from volunteering for anything. Corky and his co-pilot volunteered for that first mission with the medics. The 10 glider pilots that went in following him, all volunteers. The 50, the next day, they were told they weren't going to have co-pilots and told why. And they all still volunteered and went in on the mission. They never looked back. That I think was our password, I guess. Never look back, and we never did. And that's not that we were any different from any other group in World War II with submariners and people like that, but that was our own particular thing, and we did it.
Other glider veterans had different experiences. Leo Cordier participated in 6 combat landings, each more harrowing than the last.
I always wanted to fly. I enlisted in the infantry to get the year's training over with. That was required prior to entering the war on December 7th, 1941. When war broke out and we entered, I requested transfer to the Old Army Air Corps and was accepted. And leaving the infantry, I started my career in the Old Army Air Corps. I found out that they were looking for glider pilots. The new program had started, and I was very much interested, always wanted to fly, and it was one way of doing it. I was always interested in gliders. I was accepted for the training, and that started it off. We know we would be with the airborne troops, the paratroopers, essentially, and had no idea what it would entail. I enjoyed flying the thing after a few practice flights, and it was a little scary when you encountered the prop washer of the tow plane. The most important thing was to stay out of the prop wash as you were being towed, and if you got above the prop wash, you could enjoy a pretty smooth flight. You encountered the prop wash, as I said, in the turns, and that was a little uncomfortable. But you got used to that after a while.
Once the all-too-brief training was completed, it was time for his first mission, flying behind enemy lines on D-Day.
The weather was rather rainy at the time we entered the glider. It rained intermittently on D-Day. We were supposed to go in June 5th, but the weather was bad. They postponed it to June 6th. The takeoff went quite well. It took us about 30 minutes to assemble. The formation was contained 26 gliders, 18 horses, and 8 CG-4As. I was tail end Charlie, number 26, in a CG-4A. It was approximately 6 6 p.m. in the evening. We were the first daylight mission. The code name was Elmira, if I recall correctly.
Yeah.
And the formation, as I mentioned, took about a half hour. Then we headed for the southeastern coast of England. Our first checkpoint was the Isle of Wight. Our altitude at the time was 700 feet. We could see the people coming out of the workshops and the homes waving to us on our way through. And at the checkpoint, the Isle of Wight, we headed out over the channel. We were laughing and joking, had a lot of confidence in us. I looked back at the airborne troopers to see if they were okay, and they nodded back. They were scared. We were scared too, but at least we were busy flying the aircraft to make sure the rope was taut, didn't get loose, so we wouldn't have any problems with it snapping. We flew directly over the battleship Texas, and it was firing their big guns toward the Utah Beach coast, and we could actually see the shells disappearing into the haze and the heavy smoke at the beach. We flew on for about another 2 miles, and then we encountered the greatest sight that I can imagine. It was the invasion fleet, the ships shuttling back and forth, and the greatest sight I ever occurred in my entire life was the invasion fleet, seeing the invasion fleet from the greenhouse nose of the glider. As we approached Utah Beach, we made a left turn about a mile offshore and then flew parallel to the beach, and then made a final right-hand turn heading toward the shore. That was our initial point. And from then on, we were to go straight in 8 miles from the initial point. At that time, the small arms fires started up at us, and the flak started to come up, and the wings rocked and shuddered from the concussions, and we quickly realized this wasn't another training mission. As we headed in, the fire became more intense, and we could hear the bullets, the small arms fire, ricocheting off the metal tubing of the glider, and some hitting the Jeep. But we made it through. By that time, our altitude was 1,500 feet, and really too high for us to make a very quick, fast landing. We were supposed to go in at 500 feet where we could make one turn or two and then get in as soon as we possibly could. But at 1,500 feet, when we released, we were sitting ducks. They could really get us with small arms fire. I was pretty well protected. I had sandbags under the seat. We had flak suits on, and that helped us from the small arms fire. Over the landing zone, the other gliders were flying every which way, and there was danger of mid-air collision. One glider was coming right at us, and luckily I spotted it, and we dove, and they whooshed by about 4 feet above us, that close. I recognized the pilot. Poor guy later on got killed on a Holland mission, but I did recognize him when he whooshed by in Normandy. We could see the Germans firing at us on the ground at the altitude of approximately 1,000 feet. We made an approach to a little clearing that didn't have Rommel's asparagus, the glider obstacle poles that General Rommel thought of for his opposition to glider landings. We spotted a field with a couple horses in, and we knew there wasn't any mines in the field, and headed for that. We made a big circular left-hand pattern and made the approach to the small field that we had picked out that had the horses. And we planned on using the rest to shoot, but at 500 feet it was inoperative. We wanted to clear the trees. We were a little too high, and we had to dive toward the ground in order to make it. Otherwise, we'd have crashed directly into the trees. We got on the ground, applied full brakes, put the glider up on the skids, and about 60 miles an hour, we plowed right into the embankment where the hedgerows were. And I tried to cock the glider to the right so the wing would hit first, but to absorb some of the shock, but there's no luck there. We just slid directly into the embankment. My feet punched through the nose of the glider. The control column came back and hit me in the face. Fortunately, I had the heavy fog piercing goggles on, and that helped the impact. I was kind of dazed. The co-pilot was okay. The lieutenant from the 82nd sitting in a Jeep had a broken leg. The other fellow was a bit dazed, but okay. We noticed on the other side of the embankment there was little activity, and there was a couple German soldiers there that could have really knocked us off, but they were more scared than we were and took off. We got out of the glider and waited a while. We were able to get all the equipment and headed toward our assembly point near the town of St. Mary Glees, which was the first town captured in Normandy. On the way through, we had to encounter sniper fire and happened to see some of the French civilians that had been picked up and were loaded onto a flat big truck, stacked like cordwood. That was quite a sight, one of the first sights we encountered. We were able to make it back to the assembly point and stayed there for quite a while until they started bracketing us with the mortar fire. I had a Thompson submachine gun. That helped as a scale weapon. If you fired that at them, that was very effective. We got our Jeep out without too much difficulty and carried all the equipment on the Jeep. And I think we had a total of about 10 personnel by the time we got to our assembly point near St. Mary Glees. That night, as I mentioned, we dug into this farmhouse, and the next morning we assembled, and after encountering quite a bit of sniper fire, we was assigned to take prisoners back to Utah Beach. So we had about 200 prisoners. We marched back to Utah Beach. On the way back, we were being bracketed by mortar fire, which was quite effective. One fellow was hit, seriously wounded, and another was killed as we approached the Utah Beach area. Well, we were one lucky bunch, most
Those of us that came
if you survived one mission, you're doing well, bro. I'm sure of that. How the heck I got through all those, it's beyond me. I think back, how the hell did I get out of that? You know?
Cordier's next mission would take him into Holland to secure a German-held bridge in Operation Market Garden, made famous by the motion picture, A Bridge Too Far.
On Market Garden, by that time, we knew pretty well much to expect if we had gone into either Normandy or southern France or both. In my case, it was both, so I was becoming quite seasoned and knew what to expect. On Market Garden, we took off from England and flew in pretty adverse weather conditions. We flew across the North Sea. Some of the serials flew south of us across the Channel and then up into Holland, but we flew across the southern part of the North Sea. The weather was very bad, and some of the flights had to be postponed. But we took off on the 17th and encountered heavy fog and clouds over the North Sea, and we had to fly blind in quite a few areas where you couldn't see the tow ship, and that was pretty scary because you know if that rope was left to dangle and the tow ship surged forward, it could snap and we'd go down into the North Sea, and that happened to quite a few of the gliders that were being towed through that overcast. Fortunately, we got through and we rode above it way high, sitting ducks up there. If the German fighters had gotten through, they could really done a job on us. But we made it over the LC. Our landing zone was several miles north of the city of Eindhoven, a little town of Zaan. That was the first bridge. The 101st Airborne Division, we were carrying in elements of the 101st, was assigned to taking that bridge. It was taken, incidentally. It wasn't the bridge too far. That was the British responsibility up at Arnhem. The landing zone was a big expanse of open meadow, ideal for glider landing. As we encountered the landing zone, as we approached the landing zone, the anti-aircraft fire became very intense. It was so intense that a couple of the tow ships in the front of the formation were shot down, and we knew we were in for trouble. The flak was bursting all around us. Flew another maybe a mile or so, and all of a sudden my glider ballooned up, and I realized it had been hit. So I immediately cut off. So having part of the tail was shot off, and I didn't have full elevator control. So I cut off and made a left turn. There's plenty of room down below. By the time I get down to 1,500 feet, anti-aircraft fire, a 20 millimeter, I couldn't tell what it was tracer fire that came up and followed me all the way down to the point where we landed. The fire was perhaps maybe 3 or 4 feet ahead of the nose of the glider. If they backed up a bit, or if I went forward a bit, we'd have been blown to smithereens. Again, I was carrying a Jeep, one airborne sergeant in the Jeep, and one airborne 101st first lieutenant working the spoilers for me in the co-pilot seat. And I was hoping he'd let go of the spoilers when I told him to release, because he could have been very well frozen to that bar, being fired upon and going in with a disabled glider. Fortunately, he released when I told him to, and I was able to level it out a little bit, but we're very fast. We hit the ground, I would say, about maybe 90 miles an hour, way too fast. And fortunately, the ground was soft, sandy, and we plowed in. Again, we probably stopped in about 60 or 70 feet. And we were completely covered with dirt and sand and dust. In the meantime, they're still firing at us. And how we got out of the glider, to this day, I don't recall just how we got out of that glider. But the three of us got out of the glider. And fortunately, there was members of the 101st Airborne in a ditch to the east side of us, and they hollered, and we ran in the right direction. And the machine gun fire was so intense, the dirt was blowing all up around us. Some of it hitting us in the faces, and we were able to dive into the ditch where the paratroopers were, and we laid there exhausted about a half hour. I doubt if I could speak at all for another half hour or so. We were very fortunate on that one, being hit and then being under heavy fire as we got out of the glider. The paratroopers were able to wipe this company out. It was quite substantial, and we were able to get back maybe a couple hours later to load the Jeep and supplies that we're carrying in. And we were there for about 3 days, if I recall correctly. We ran into some of the British troopers that had landed in our area. They should have been north of us, but they landed in our area. We were without supplies, had no food, and I recall, he says, there's some mushrooms over there, there's British sergeant said, I know they're good. So he cooked them up. We had the little burners, and they tasted good, tasted like steak. So at least we weren't starving until we could get some supplies to us. We heard that they were going to drop anti-personnel mines in the area, and those were mines that had just about everything in them, nails, glass, wire, and everything that spread all over the area, hoping that they could hit some of the American soldiers, Allied soldiers, with the British being with us. And we dug in. I think I dug a foxhole about 10 feet deep. If a bomb dropped near it, I'm sure we would have been buried alive, but fortunately we didn't encounter any of the bombing of that sort. We fought along with the paratroopers for several days, and then when things quieted down, we escorted more prisoners back into Belgium. And we finally made our way to Brussels before we were ferried back to England in case they needed us for another mission. Our area, the battle, Market Garden was successful. Of course, the British up near the bridge at Arnhem, the bridge too far, was made into the movie. They went in with 10,000 troops and only 2,000 got out there. What happened? There was a German Panzer division, which our intelligence didn't pick up. The Allied intelligence didn't pick up, although they were warned, and that's what happened to the British. They encountered the Panzer division that was regrouping on the east side of the Rhine. The war would have ended 6 weeks earlier if they had captured the bridge at Arnhem, and our troops could have gone down to the German plain on the east side of the Rhine River.
Then, in March of 1945, Cordier flew his final and most harrowing mission, Operation Varsity.
My mission was to command a combat glider flying control team. There's 2 gliders made up of a jeep, and the second one with a trailer with the high-powered radio and communications equipment in it. Job was to take over airfields that we captured and set up flying control and operations. The first mission we were used on was the Varsity mission. As such, I was sent on detached service to the 440th Troop Carrier Group that was located in Orleans, France. And the reason for that was they wanted us up front. The 440th is one of the first groups to get in. They wanted that radio equipment in early so we could communicate back to non-troop carrier headquarters near Paris. That went well. The takeoff did. It took a total of 4 hours to pass one given point. That was the biggest one-day mission for gliders during the war. The Holland mission was bigger, but that was spread out over a period of several days. When we crossed the Rhine, we encountered heavy smoke. They had laid a smoke screen to cover the operations, the ground operations crossing the Rhine. It was so thick we couldn't see. We were practically flying blind, and the flashes of anti-aircraft fire was tremendous, and they were all around us. And it's no wonder a lot of us didn't get hit. We headed in on an easterly course, and when we cut off, we were high again, too high, maybe about 1,500 feet. We should have been down around 500. We made a left turn. Actually, it was a 270-degree turn, and we were headed south for the landing. As we swung around 270 degrees, we could get glimpses of the ground through the smoke. And there was 2 big towers that had wires that were strung across them, but they were cut because they knew we were coming in with the gliders in that area. I believe I was the first glider in because there's no one ahead of me. Even though there was several gliders ahead of me in the formation, I cut short and got closer in, and consequently was ahead of them. For some reason, why we didn't get shot down, because there was a battery of 88 millimeter German guns in an orchard off to the east side of us as we approached the landing zone. They were firing at us. We get down okay. I deliberately nosed the glider through 2 barbed wire fences to slow us down again. We welcome anything like that to slow us down, and was able to stop the glider. It was a 3-point landing. We didn't have to put it up on the skids. The barbed wire fences slowed us down a bit. Coming into landing at Varsity, we get down okay. We were under a lot of small arms fire. We managed to get out of the glider. As a matter of fact, there's the pilot, myself, and the co-pilot. We got out of the glider. We also had a sergeant, a communications sergeant, that was sitting in our Jeep. And we got out okay. I said, let's get under the embankment. We went around, noticed the glider got under a little shell embankment. And all hell was breaking loose. The noise was terrific. The 88's firing at us, the small arms fire that was going on between our paratroopers that had landed earlier, just ahead of us, and the Germans. I think they fired one shot that went over the glider and landed right in the middle of a group of paratroopers. They were on the west side of the area where we landed, and they just disappeared. I believe they were just blown to smithereens when they hit. We had to wait for about a half hour before we could move, and then things quieted down. Our paratroopers attacked the orchard area where the 88s were, and control that area. We were able to unload our Jeep. We found a spot in the woods where we set up our radio equipment and started communicating with the 9th Troop Carrier headquarters back in Paris. We did have a glider pilot relay station on the east bank of the Rhine that relayed our signals back to headquarters. That was controlled by a glider pilot too. It worked out quite well. I was very, very fortunate, and again, I attribute a lot to the faith I have in the good Lord. In my case, He got me through all these dangerous situations, and to this day, I don't know how I made it. I really, really don't, except for the good graces of the Lord watching over me. I know, just a statement to make, everything looked confusing, and we didn't think how well it was going to work out. But in the final analysis, the use of the gliders, I thought, was very successful. It enabled us to get the heavy equipment in, to get self-contained equipment, whereas if we dropped them by chute, there was, for instance, the pack howitzer had several pieces. They would be spread over enemy territory, whereas if they left it intact and sent the crew along with the gun, we could have it. Even if the crew got killed, the gun was probably still usable and other people could use it. So that was important because the gliders could carry this equipment in. I recall going back to normally the 50th anniversary of D-Day and going through the cemetery at Culver-sur-Mer, Omaha Beach, and looking among the crosses. I spotted 2 of the glider pilots that were buried there, along with General Pratt, the first general that was killed in Colonel Murphy's glider on D-Day. I looked down, I said, well, that could have been me. Then again, you wonder. That was remarkable going back the 50th anniversary. There was about 50,000 people there, and there was an eerie silence about the area. And what impressed me was seeing at a little shrine there in the middle of the cemetery saying that they shall be forever young. And that's how you remember these young people and some of your buddies that were killed that were interred there. That's the hardest part, to think about all the young people that were cut short in the start of their lives, the prime of their lives. And that's what bothers me, if so many people don't appreciate what was done in World War II.
But his nation does remember and appreciate his service, and that of all the brave men who flew in the Glider Corps. And now, we still think back and marvel at the bravery of the men who flew the original stealth airplanes, the gliders of World War II. We hope you've enjoyed this presentation of In Their Own Words. This program was created and produced by First Person Productions Incorporated, in association with the Documentary Broadcasting Company. Produced by David Benson. Written by Rod Pyle. Engineered by Greg Bartheld and Brian Donovan. Narrated by Bill Ratner. This production is copywritten by First Person Productions Incorporated. Any unauthorized broadcast, public performance, or copying is a violation of applicable laws.
Step back in time and discover the untold stories of history's greatest heroes. From ancient civilizations to modern times, the Anthology of Heroes podcast takes you on a journey through history, uncovering the bravery and determination of those who stood up for what they believed in. These aren't just stories from old history books, they're the human experiences of those who fought for justice, freedom, and their principles. From the defiance of Vercingetorix as he stood against Rome, to the unwavering spirit of Skanderbeg as he faced down the Ottoman Empire, each episode is a journey through their life as we follow their triumphs and their failures. Meticulously researched with quotes and observations from primary sources, Anthology of Heroes is the perfect blend of expert research and engaging storytelling. So listen and subscribe now on your favorite podcasting app.